The facts of this case are pretty straightforward. Mr. Nettleship agreed to teach his friend Mrs. Weston how to drive. One day during a driving lesson, Mrs. Weston lost control of the vehicle and crashed into a lamppost. She had not yet passed her driving test, and at the time of the accident, Mr. Nettleship was sitting in the passenger seat. He sustained serious injuries and sued Mrs. Weston for negligence. The judge had to decide whether a learner driver like Mrs. Weston should be held to the same standard of a competent driver. Is this fair for learners who have not yet had the chance to gain experience? What about fairness to victims who may be injured by inexperienced drivers? These were the difficult policy questions the judge had to consider. So what's the legal principle in this case? Well, in negligence, the duty of care is measured by the objective standard of a reasonable and competent person performing that activity. Normally, the law does not adjust this standard for inexperience. This means that if you choose to engage in an activity that involves risk to others, such as driving, then you must meet the ordinary standard of competence in that activity. Applying this to our case, the judge said that Mrs. Weston, even though a learner, owed Mr. Nettleship the same duty of care as any other qualified driver. He rejected the idea that there should be a special rule for learners because that would create more problems than it solved. For example, how would you determine when a learner became so experienced that they were no longer entitled to the lower standard? Also, allowing a lower standard for learners could lead to unfair outcomes for victims like Mr. Nettleship. People who share the road have the right to assume that other drivers are competent and will drive with reasonable care. If we allowed inexperienced drivers to drive below this standard, then there would be uncertainty and unpredictability on our roads. This would be unfair for other road users who could be injured by inexperienced drivers. On the other hand, the judge acknowledged that perhaps some sympathy should be shown to learners who are genuinely new to driving. However, he said that public safety and fairness to injured parties must come first. Therefore, he applied the standard of a competent driver to Mrs. Weston. In reaching his conclusion, the judge considered various policy arguments. He acknowledged that if the standard for learners was too high, it could discourage people from learning to drive, which would not be a good outcome for society. On the other hand, if the standard was too low, then innocent people like Mr. Nettleship could be unfairly injured. He also considered the views of other jurisdictions, such as the United States, where a lower standard is applied to learners. However, he ultimately decided that the best approach was to apply the same standard to learners as to competent drivers. So what was the decision in the case? Well, the judge held that learner drivers are judged by the standard of a competent driver. Mrs. Weston was therefore liable for Mr. Nettleship's injuries. Why is this case important? Well, it clarifies the standard of care that applies to learner drivers. It confirms that the standard is objective and does not bend for inexperience. This provides certainty for road users and victims of negligence, while also encouraging people to learn to drive and take part in other potentially risky activities. What are the broader implications of this case? Well, the decision in this case has been applied to other situations where the standard of care is at issue. For example, in cases involving professionals, the courts have held that the standard of care is that of a competent professional in that field. This means that if you choose to hold yourself out as a professional, then you will be judged by the standard of your profession, even if you are a beginner. So, what are my final thoughts on this case? I think this is a great example of how the law tries to balance competing interests. On the one hand, we want to encourage people to learn new skills, including driving. But on the other hand, we also need to protect innocent people from the risks that can be involved. Ultimately, I think the court got it right. We can't allow people to injure others simply because they are inexperienced. We must all meet the same standard of care, regardless of our level of skill or competence. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it, subscribe to the channel, and share it with your friends. And if you want to learn more about negligence, check out the playlist in the description. Thanks for watching.